everyone, my name is Kevin, and I've been asleep for 6 months. Did anything happen? Kamala won, right? Fuck. Hey everyone, what's up? Influence is an interesting word. What does it mean to be influential, to influence others? Is it the ability to convince people of something, make them believe what you believe? Is it the ability to advertise a product? Or is it simply the capacity to share information on a large scale? Or is it just another form of mind control that the deep state uses to make trans soldiers for the liberal agenda? Joe Biden, 5G vaccine, Burisma chemtrails, Nancy Pelosi. Regardless of how you define it, capital I influence is now bigger than ever. With the advent of the internet and social media, the word influence has kind of lost all of its meaning. I mean, it's literally what we call someone who is internet famous, an influencer. But even so, the internet has, for the first time, kind of made influence, whatever that may be, accessible to everyday people. It's more or less been democratized. Social media has made it so that it's possible to obtain in minutes what used to take decades of experience in the media industry to achieve. You can seemingly overnight go from just some girl to that girl from that one viral video that she pivoted into a mediocre podcast and eventually an ethically questionable cryptocurrency. God, I love living in the future. The point is, influence is all the rage these days. Individuals dream of attaining it, corporations compete to control it, and every little kid that would have otherwise wanted to be an astronaut or a firefighter when they grew up now wants to be a YouTuber. We're not going to make it as a species. But has anyone actually stopped to ask if this democratization of influence has been a good thing? I mean, sure, it's made it easier for people to share information quickly, and the average person is more informed than they were just a decade or two ago, but it's not just us everyday people that have been empowered by the digital age, is it? Bad and nefarious actors like billionaires and corporations have as well. I mean, I know this might be hard to hear, but the Wendy's Twitter account isn't full of recycled internet jokes and outdated online whimsy because they want to be your friend. They want to sell you those square burgers. In fact, if you think about it, influence is no longer just one of the many forms of interpersonal communication. Now it's a business model. In the last 10 years, entire media conglomerates have been established solely driven by the new ways that information is shared online. This newfound ability for just about anybody to reach a wide audience in no time flat has almost been entirely captured and commodified by big business, in seemingly direct contrast to the more democratic ideals that guided the formation of the early internet, right? Because, like, before the internet, it used to be that those who obtained influence did so through working their way through systems, whether it be climbing the corporate ladder, or maneuvering through the machinations of government, or honing an artistic craft. Systems were rigid, bureaucratic, hard to change, and therefore gaining a ton of influence very, very quickly wasn't really a thing like it is today, unless you did something really crazy. And those systems had their benefits. They made it so that you could infer that the news you were consuming was legitimate journalism. They made it so that the content you watched was curated by actual people with opinions instead of content algorithms. And they made it so that one crude joke about oral sex couldn't ever possibly lead to large-scale financial fraud. Yes, I'm still on a Huck to a girl, okay? It happened during my break. Cut me some slack. Okay, what do you want me to do? Not make jokes about it? I'm just a boy. But those systems, those rigid and static bureaucracies of old that were until very recently the norm, also had their drawbacks. They made it so that the information you saw was only what very powerful people in society wanted you to see. They made it so that the power to change and shape public opinion was in the hands of a very small number of rich people. They made it so that people were only ever as educated as large institutions deemed they should be. And all of that made people easy to control, easy to influence. And for a while, it seemed like the internet and social media were the answers to these problems. I mean, a free and open way to share information with the entire world, democratically and without government intervention? What are we, socialists? But it's true. In its early days, the ideology that precipitated the internet was closer to a leftist political project than a capitalist business venture, with its pioneers believing it could be a more democratic way of sharing information, a tool for the greater good. There were and still are many people that believe that the internet and its egalitarian ethos would be a way to even bridge socioeconomic divides and uplift unheard voices by providing equal access to information. But here's the thing. It's been a couple decades now, and Well, we're not exactly there yet. I mean, don't get me wrong, the internet is a good thing, and I think it's been a net positive on humanity, I think. But I would be lying if I didn't say that that hope for socioeconomic tech egalitarianism that we all felt in the early days of the internet hadn't waned a bit, or a lot, over the years. Actually, if I'm being honest, it seems like a lot of the problems we had with the old systems are like more or less back now. All major communications platforms are owned by ultra-wealthy oligarchs with sole control over them, who pick and choose which topics are acceptable to talk about, suppress information that hinders their ability to accumulate more wealth, and arbitrarily decide when and when not to enforce their already deliberately vague content moderation policies, seemingly based solely on vibes. And now I can't even trust the news that I get anymore, because there's a good chance that the info that forces its way onto my timeline is from a white supremacist account masquerading as a billionaire's account, masquerading as someone who knows how to play Path of Exile too. I mean, what gives, right? I mean, I thought the internet was supposed to ditch the oligarchy and keep the free access to information, not ditch the free access and keep the oligarchy. It would seem that rather than dismantling the old hierarchies, the internet has simply replaced them with different ones, reshaping old systems of power into something arguably more insidious. Now, instead of a handful of media barons controlling the flow of information, we have a handful of frog-looking ass billionaires in Silicon Valley doing the exact same thing. Except now, it's not even people who control all the content and information we consume. It's algorithms, it's programs, entities that can't be held legally or morally responsible for anything. I can't even scroll anymore without the constant fear in the back of my mind that at any moment I could be subject to the opinions of a 14-year-old, an injustice which, in my opinion, is among America's greatest violations of civil liberties. So what do we do about this? How do we make sure that the levers of public influence don't fall into the hands of the wrong people? Why is it so hard to democratize these things and keep them that way? And why do we keep letting fascists take them from us? Like, seriously, what's up with that? Well, in order to answer those questions, we're gonna have to take a look at an example, but not just any example. It needs to be perfect. It has to encapsulate everything I just described. It has to be morally bankrupt. It can't be useful to anyone but the worst people in society. Oh, and it needs to be the perfect slave to the algorithm too, never deviating from what the analytics dictate. And it's gotta be soulless. No artistic value or introspection whatsoever, just pure fuel to the ever-burning flames that perpetually whip the edges of society, a constant reminder that all that awaits us is dust and an ever-present temptation just to give into it, a deep, nihilistic embrace, a warm, corporate hug. Of course. That's it. Today, we're going to be talking about Jubilee. Hey, sorry, I kind of had to do that since I'm doing the whole video essayist shtick now, I guess. Isn't that a thing? Like, don't they usually have, like, a drink of some sort and then, like, irreverently greet their audience as if they didn't just spend 15 minutes setting up the camera and lighting the shot? I think in this video, I should try and hit on as many video essayist tropes as I possibly can. I think that would be a pretty epic bit. And I think we're off to a pretty good start, too, right? Like, number 1 is the bisexual lighting. Number 2 is holding the microphone instead of having it on your desk or something. And number 3 is the beverage. That's comically large. So yeah, I think we're pretty good so far. Let me know if I do any other video essayist tropes in the comments. Anyway, what the fuck was I talking about? Oh yeah, Jubilee. So this all started, like all great videos do, when a couple of months ago I saw some discourse online. Well, actually, it wasn't really a discourse so much as it was like a public outcry. Just like a sweeping condemnation from almost everybody. And what the outcry was in response to was this video by Jubilee called One Conservative versus 25 LGBTQ+ activists. I'm sure you've seen this video around. It had several viral moments on Twitter. Now, believe it or not, this is not the first time I've ever considered doing a video on Jubilee. In fact, this is one of my oldest video ideas from way back when I started the channel. But I could never get the thesis of the video quite right, and Jubilee itself wasn't yet so egregious, and so it really just never came together. That is, until my timeline on Twitter started becoming flooded with Jubilee content nonstop. nonstop around the end of last year. I'm sure a lot of you experienced this too, where right around the election, I would say, it just became inescapable, largely due to this new show they started doing called Surrounded, featuring a lot of prominent right-wing figures online. I mean, they did one with Ben Shapiro, Charlie Kirk, and obviously the one with Michael Knowles, and literally every single one of them had multiple viral moments on Twitter. Like, it felt like every time Jubilee would upload an episode, that my timeline would just be that for like a fortnight. And it kind of struck me as odd that something I had in my crosshairs at one point in time was just now causing so much discourse online. So I went and checked out all of those videos that were getting all of that attention, and oh my God.
You're confused about your identity. I think the spread of LGBTQ identity is a bad thing. Pride parades should be banned because they're disgusting.
I am a transgender person. You can't just
You are a
skip over
confused
that
person. Transgenderism is false, and we should eradicate it from public life because it's harmful to everyone. I don't think that my grandmother or my kids or even myself should be forced to see these obscene displays in public. They should be banned, certainly a government building. If I were in your HOA, I would ban it because it's a very nasty image, and kids shouldn't have to see it. LGBTQ identity is a social contagion. It's a needless risk. It's based on a false view of reality. The fact of identifying as LGBTQ is a social contagion. There is no such thing as same-sex marriage. I want to eradicate a whole ideology of transgenderism. If a little boy says he's a little girl, he isn't really a little girl, he's a little boy. It symbolizes LGBT identity, and I don't think that should be waved out in public. Transgenderism should be eradicated from public life entirely.
Yeah. So I'll be the first to admit, right, I hadn't consumed that much Jubilee content in the years prior to this new show of theirs, but I'd seen a little bit, and maybe I'm crazy, but, like, it was never this bad before, right? Like, there's been a steep ramp up in the amount of blatant bigotry and virulent hate that has been allowed to fester on Jubilee's platform, like, kind of unaddressed, too, right?
We're not eradicating people. You're trying to say that because it makes us look crazy.
That's what you're saying.
No, I said I want to eradicate a whole ideology of transgenderism.
So yeah, it would seem like in the past couple of years, Jubilee has gone from your run-of-the-mill content farm that makes videos that you put on while you fold laundry to like a right-wing propaganda mill, essentially. Now, instead of a background noise factory, it's essentially just a place that fascists can go to say their talking points, ostensibly with little to no pushback or consequences. Fun. I mean, I would say this wasn't on my 2025 bingo card, but none of the other things that have happened this year were either, so... But yeah, this new Jubilee, where Nazis are allowed to threaten the lives of minorities live on air, took me by surprise, to say the least. But before I fly off the handle about online conservative punditry, I suppose I should back up a bit. Now, if you don't know what Jubilee is technically a YouTube channel, but at this point, it's grown to such a size that it would be more accurate to call them a full-blown media organization. At its core, it's a production company that creates a wide variety of recurring series for its audience of millions. Some of their most well-known shows include Middle Ground, Spectrum, Odd Man Out, to name a few, the most popular of which tend to involve things like hot-button social issues, political debates, and like social experimentation with a wide variety of different perspectives. The main goal of Jubilee, according to the mission statement on their website, is to provoke understanding and create human connection. Jubilee Media is a digital media company that pushes boundaries, tackles taboos, and breaks the rules. We believe discomfort and conflict are pivotal forces in creating human connection. In short, we're not afraid to go there. Yeah, I'll say.
Abortion is murder and should be illegal.
Transgenderism should be eradicated from public life entirely.
I think that'll do it. Yeah, I think that'll do it.
Kamala Harris is a DEI candidate.
So yeah, basically what they would have you believe is that they pursue some nebulous humanitarian goal of mutual understanding, personal connection, and hashing it out with good faith debate. The thing is, though, if you actually watch any of their content, it becomes immediately clear that this is horseshit. Setting aside for a second the more in-depth concerns about this content that we will get to, just based on vibes alone, this is clearly not a group of people who give a single fuck about provoking understanding and creating human connection, right? Like, I'm gonna be real with you guys. I had to watch a lot of Jubilee for this video, and Is the fucking human connection in the room with us, dog?
I hope your daughter lives a very happy life and gets away from you.
Okay, so that is really nasty.
I guess my understanding is just too unprovoked, because I truly don't get how people watch this shit. Let me explain. So one of their more popular shows is a show called Middle Ground, which is, for all intents and purposes, a debate series where people from opposing ideologies, backgrounds, or body types are asked a series of prompts and invited to debate each other. And in theory, the goal is for the two groups to find a middle ground, or in other words, some sort of hypothetical compromise or moderate position that factors in both viewpoints. Basically, it's a show where they get a bunch of people from two groups who probably don't like each other very much and then give them prompts to argue over. And even before the more recent controversies they've faced, this show has gotten a lot of criticism in the past for how the ideas in it are presented and how the videos themselves are framed. Like, take Flat Earthers versus Science, for example, an episode where they have a group of scientists and a group of Flat Earthers go head-to-head. Now, I'll spare my loyal viewers the 35-minute watch and just go ahead and tell you what happens in this video. The scientists say things that are true, and the Flat Earthers say things that are false. For 35 minutes.
And not one of those geologists have said, what is this?
Been proven to be fake.
And also and collected on the ice in Antarctica and in the Arctic as well. Those are collected. You don't have to go to the moon to get moon rocks.
So if you're really taking an honest look at this video from Jubilee, is there a middle ground here? Like, does the room for compromise between these groups even exist? Well, no, right? It doesn't, because these people are factually wrong. There is no middle ground between the truth and lies. On some issues, there's just what's true and what's not true. And when you frame it like there can be a reasonable compromise between evidence-based research, science, and baseless, terminally online conspiracy, you both delegitimize the work of professionals who've dedicated their lives to their respective academic fields and legitimize people who claim to know better than said professionals because they saw a post on social media.
I'm Marina Yeri. I'm a theoretical physicist, and I'm with the University of Irvine.
I'm Shelley Lewis. I'm a graduate of West Point, critical thinker, and jumped out of the airplane.
And look, I get it. Flat Earth is kind of a silly issue, and at the end of the day, if more people end up being Flat Earthers because of this video, it probably won't cause that much harm to the world, all things considered. But what about other topics that require the same amount of expertise and for which there's a comparable amount of conspiracism and skepticism that actually do have real-world consequences? What happens when you start portraying, for example, public health experts and doctors in the same light as, say, anti-vaxxers? How much of a middle ground can actually exist between professional ecologists and climate change deniers? At what point does an effort to find a middle ground become just an opportunity for people with bad ideas to legitimize them, to portray them as equally valuable as evidence-based research and factual knowledge? Because I'm going to let you in on a little secret here. Again, I've watched a lot of Jubilee in preparation for this video. They don't actually ever find the middle ground. They don't ever do that. I know, shocker. You'd think a group of people whose identity revolves around their participation in a cult-like conspiracy that requires the rejection of empirical fact as a moral rule when presented with said empirical facts would calmly admit defeat and cordially concede the entire debate in an honest and professional manner. But turns out they kind of just start screaming.
Show me how you isolate gravity. If gravity is an assumption, show me in the scientific method how you isolate gravity.
And this really brings to light an internal contradiction in the content of Jubilee, right? Which is, if there's no middle ground to be found, right? If an ideological compromise between these two groups by definition cannot be reached, then what's the point of the video? Right? Like, if you have a debate show called Middle Ground, and the showcase for an episode is two ideologies that are mutually exclusive, that definitionally cannot have a middle ground, then why does the video exist? Middle Ground has over 150 episodes as I'm recording this, and not once has the hypothetical moment of mutual respect giving way to common understanding ever taken place. People mostly just want to say their part as loud as possible and then leave.
What you're trying to do is you're trying to force me into a yes or no question when I can't even respond to the claims that you've made.
Was it No, you're dancing around the question because you don't want to answer it because it's going to make you look bad.
I'm starting to think this show only exists because it's entertaining entertaining to watch people argue and not as part of a larger effort to reach the truth. Many such cases. And that kind of begs the question, right? Once you've taken away the artifice of this type of content, the illusion of the potential for mutual agreement, what, if anything, is left? Well, you have a video that's essentially just two groups of people arguing with no resolution, no result, no deeper understanding. It's just words falling on deaf ears and you, the viewer, feeling anxious, really. Oh, how could these people believe this insane thing? Is this really what half of the world thinks? Why didn't the person I agree with say this part? Oh, if only I was on that show, I would have said X. And before you know it, it's over, and you've just spent 30 minutes to an hour of your day locked into a piece of content that was just kind of making you feel bad. But that's exactly the point. The real intentions of Jubilee aren't to provoke understanding and create human connection or whatever. It's to capitalize on existing political tension and heated debate to make retention maximizing slop content for a profit. They don't care about the discussion being had or its results or how it might impact the world. They care about how long they can get you to watch. So they intentionally create content that feeds off of your emotions. It's kind of the same reason you can't look away from a train wreck or like a car crash. You know it's not good, and there can't possibly be anything positive that you gain from looking at it, but it's just so emotionally visceral that you can't help but look. And yeah, you might feel uncomfortable or frustrated or even upset, but you keep watching anyway because it's so intense. That is how Jubilee's content works. They create a captive audience by exploiting the viewer's emotions, preying on their emotional attachment to their own political identity. And when you think about it, there's almost a voyeuristic element to it too, right? You're observing conflict from a safe distance, watching opposing ideologies clash without actually having to step in yourself. In other words, you get to see your team get a touchdown without actually having to risk getting tackled. By the way, for all my European viewers, that was a football reference. Real football, not whatever you people think it is. This approach to content, creating political altercations that accomplish nothing and run around in circles just to maximize watch time, is the main business model of Jubilee. Nearly all of their most popular videos, and certainly their most popular series, take advantage of pre-existing political tension and turn it into viewer retention data. And if you ever need proof of this, by the way, just take a look at how their debates are structured. I mean, it's kind of become a meme at this point, but in the vast majority of their content, at least one side of the debate is mostly made up of people who aren't experts on the topic being discussed, like at all, like usually unqualified college-aged Zoomers. You'll almost never find an episode of Jubilee where everyone involved is a competent, experienced, and professional person capable of having a civilized and well-informed conversation. Instead, what you'll find is someone who has dedicated their life to a particular field or topic, arguing with about 6 to 10 people who definitely know what skibbity means. And don't be fooled, this is by design. If everyone in the room was competent, argued in good faith, and was genuinely interested in the truth, nobody would keep watching because it wouldn't be as emotionally charged, and that train wreck effect that's so critical to Jubilee's business model would be gone.
No, we need to bring shaming back. Okay. We need to bring shaming back in so many other regards besides obesity. We need to do it with sluts. We need to shame fat people. We need to shame everybody. I mean, if I was president, hell, I'd put all of them in a fat concentration camp so they can concentrate on dieting and exercising.
There's another show, by the way, that they do that is essentially just them owning their own lack of regard for truth and nuance and making a show out of it. Surrounded is another political debate show on Jubilee that differs from Middle Ground in that the pretense that Middle Ground has of an honest, good faith debate on a given subject is basically just completely discarded in favor of blood sports. This show, by the way, is where most of Jubilee's recent viral clips have been coming from, so you've probably seen this show quite a bit on your own timeline already, even if you don't watch the channel.
Fetus is in utero.
What does fetus mean in Latin?
What the f***? I'm sorry, is this
It means little human being.
Ooh, this smile is very creepy. Okay.
On Surrounded, one person, usually an expert or someone notable in politics, is placed in the center of a circle of 20 people who disagree with them, and one person at a time gets to challenge the expert in a timed, speed dating-ish style debate. The expert must then defend their views until either the time runs out or the challenger is voted out by the rest of the circle. And guys, let me tell you, this show sucks. Surrounded is one of those shows that is so blatantly toxic and unpleasant to watch, frankly, that it's hard to give insightful commentary on it. The entire structure of the show is designed to make it so that each conversation is both extremely rushed and unproductive, because you can get voted out by the other challengers at any point. So as a result, each debate is less of a good faith discussion than it is just a test of, okay, how can I say my opinions as fast as possible? Okay, what's the fastest way to make myself look like a stupid asshole? What is the loudest I can be in the shortest amount of time? And it's like, yeah, dude, if I'm in the marketplace for informative debate about incredibly nuanced political subjects, the first qualities I look for are short, emotionally charged, and largely uninformed. Absolutely, brother. The running theme of Jubilee's content seems to be letting things like spectacle and entertainment value take precedence over things like substance and educational value, spending more time, money, and energy on making their show watchable at the expense of what makes it valuable. Because when you intentionally prioritize watchability over all else like that, you essentially sacrifice your show's ability to maintain things like honesty, civility, and nuance. I mean, it's literally built into the format of their shows. When you put one guy who knows a lot, or a lot of talking points at least, in the middle of a group of people who very much do not and do fucking lightning round debates, it's inevitable that you get just the confrontation part without the understanding part, just the misinformation part without the fact check part, just the harmful rhetoric without the opportunity for substantial pushback. And I think this is the main thing that Jubilee gets really wrong. I mean, just look at all their most popular videos. They're almost all about either an extremely controversial issue or have a very controversial implicit premise, not because they offer some incredibly valuable insight into those issues, but because the issues and ideas that are the most volatile and inflammatory make that train wreck effect easier to pull off. They make it harder to click off the video because of the intense emotional stakes innate to this kind of content. There was essentially a direct correlation between whether or not the guests on a particular video have incendiary takes and how many views that video will get. And Jubilee knows this. That's the entire reason that Jubilee is so comfortable letting open fascists say their piece in front of 20 people who aren't informed enough to push back effectively. It's good for business. Who cares if we let the fascist do his talking points for an hour and a half with basically no formal challenge? That's showbiz, baby. And look, I understand the impulse to say something like, Jubilee is an independent media organization. They can produce any kind of content they want to. Not every piece of content that covers politics has to be a fucking 3-hour video essay. Who cares? And I get that. But Jubilee has 10 fucking million subscribers, and every video they do gets hundreds of thousands, if not millions, sometimes tens of millions of views. Not to mention the tens upon tens of millions of views that the clips get when they're reposted to things like Twitter. They're extremely culturally relevant. The influence that these new online media institutions have on public discourse is undeniable. And I'm not just talking about Jubilee here either. Digital media enterprises have grown exponentially in the past decade, both in terms of their wealth and their influence in modern culture. They have the power to persuade a young audience of millions. They have the ability to pick and choose what this week's culture war issue is going to be. And in some cases, they can single-handedly move the needle in important elections. And those things affect everyone in society, not just the people who watch Jubilee. And obviously the fact that heavy hitters in the media industry have a lot of power has always been a thing, but it wasn't until very recently that those institutional powers were so overwhelmingly subject to the whims of the platforms they're hosted on. So blatantly servile to watch time analytics and retention and algorithms. I mean, how much are we actually willing to put up with as a society just so these companies can beef up their YouTube stats? I mean, I swear to fucking God, I will not watch this country fall into fascism just so Jubilee can stick another fucking mid-roll ad in the middle of their video. I will not have it. And this gets to the central question of the video, which is, how much responsibility do media companies bear for what they publish on their platform? How much social harm should we hold our YouTube channels and public figures and independent news organizations to account for? And how much harm should we be willing to tolerate just for the sake of entertainment? The Overton window, otherwise known as the window of discourse, is a term that refers to the set of political topics and arguments that are viewed as acceptable in mainstream discourse. If we were to view politics as a spectrum, the Overton window is a subset of that spectrum that includes only topics which are not commonly perceived as radical or extreme. It was originally conceived as a way to assess legislation and its viability, or its chances of actually being passed. Essentially, if a policy falls within the range of common political discourse, it's much more likely to be viable, and likewise, if it's perceived as too extreme, then it isn't. And this all might sound a bit simplistic, like, yeah, of course, extremist policies are unpopular, that's why they're called extremist, but it's important to keep in mind that the Overton window shifts over time and is something that can be pulled in one direction or another. Meaning that what's considered extremist or radical within culture is oftentimes subject to rapid and volatile change. In other words, it is a reflection of culture in a specific period of time, as different time periods have different acceptable ranges of discourse. I mean, 200 years ago, racial equality under the law was a radical position. Nowadays, well, actually, it depends on who you ask on that one still. Regardless, it's important to note that the Overton window is not a moral assertion. That is to say that it doesn't necessarily encompass which arguments are right or wrong, but simply which ones are common. It doesn't show what positions ought to be argued for, but rather the ones that are socially acceptable at a given moment in time. That doesn't mean that morals are irrelevant here, though. While it is true that what is socially acceptable is not always moral, like racism in the 1800s, for example, it is still the case that what is socially acceptable is most likely. The things that are at the top of our minds most often, no matter how immoral they may be, are the things that are most likely to become official policy. So the Overton window is important in that it's the best indicator that we have of where discourse is and subsequently where policy is likely to go. But who has the most power in determining what the range of acceptable discourse is at a given moment in time? Who is in control of these levers of social acceptability? Well, arguably, the people with the most power in determining where the Overton window lies at a given moment in time are the people within that moment of time that have the most people listening to them. So, in other words, it's kind of the media, right? First it was the paper, then it was the radio, then it was cable television, and now it's influencers and online media organizations. That's who people listen to right now, and that's who has the most control over what topics are discussed and how often. And we can already see the effects that this new power of social media has on society. I mean, there's a reason that your parents went from getting radicalized through cable television to getting radicalized through TikTok. Organizations like Jubilee hold the same power and therefore the same responsibility that institutions like great media behemoths like CBS, NBC, ABC, Fox, The Washington Post, New York Times, and so much more do, if only on a slightly smaller scale. People nowadays are consuming more political content than they ever have, which means that these podcasts and YouTube channels and independent journalists have more control over the Overton window than they ever have, which is a lot of power. The question is, should they be morally obligated to wield that power in a certain way? Just a bit ago, I said that the Overton window can be pulled in one direction or another, that public discourse has a way of rapidly shifting over time between a variety of different focal points. But what exactly does that mean, and how does it happen? What causes a culture to shift from one area on the political spectrum to another, and can that process be harnessed? And has it already? Kevin? Thank you, Kevin. In 2003, the U.S. led an invasion into the country of Iraq that lasted until 2011, making it one of the longest and bloodiest invasions in American history, and perhaps the one with the least to show for it. It's estimated to have killed between 600,000 and 2 million people as a result, and to have cost the federal government as much as $3 trillion. Basically, it was a complete and total disaster. I mean, we went in for literally no reason, killed a shit ton of people, and nobody benefited. Just a complete and total shit show. And today, a majority of Americans view the Iraq War as a mistake, a stain on American history. Which is really saying something, by the way. Do you know how many coups we've done abroad? It's insane. But it's true. Today, more than 20 years after the invasion of Iraq began, 62% of Americans say the Iraq War was not worth it. But that is in quite stark contrast to what the American consensus was leading up to the invasion. In 2002, as the Bush administration made it increasingly clear that military action in Iraq was imminent, a staggering 73% of Americans supported it, and 56% supported it even in the event of mass casualties. Kind of crazy stuff. I mean, looking back, this all seems pretty insane, right? Like, at the start of the Bush administration, support for the invasion was at just 52%, and for that figure to jump a whole 20 points in 1 year is pretty crazy work. I mean, the majority of Americans on board with war, even if thousands die? How do we become so indifferent to cruelty? Well, the support didn't come out of nowhere. Support for the war started being manufactured as early as 1991 at the end of the Gulf War during the George H.W. Bush administration and ramped up significantly during the George W. Bush administration. Aw, would you look at that? War criminal father like war criminal son. How cute. Carrying on the family business. Pretty much as soon as W took office, rhetoric about potential military action in Iraq started emanating from his administration like clockwork and was reported on by America's most trusted and respected media institutions. Let's take a look at the timeline, shall we? January 29th, 2002. Bush implies that the Iraqi government is allied with al-Qaeda and that they're seeking out weapons of mass destruction. September 7, 2002. The New York Times reports the rumor that Iraq has purchased aluminum tubes for enriching uranium. September 8th, 2002. Dick Cheney and Condoleezza Rice cite this article saying, "We don't want the smoking gun to be a mushroom cloud." September 12th, 2002. Bush tells the United Nations that Iraq still possesses chemical and biological weapons. September 24th, 2002. The British government publishes a dossier claiming Iraq sought to purchase uranium from the country of Niger. October 7th, 2002. Bush straightforwardly claims that Iraq is allied with terrorists and that it currently possesses weapons of mass destruction. January 21st, 2003. Bush confidently asserts that Saddam Hussein possesses weapons of mass destruction and that he has consistently refused to disarm. January 28th, 2003. Bush repeats the claim that Iraq sought uranium from Africa in his State of the Union address. February 5th, 2003. Colin Powell gives an address to the UN Security Council presenting, quote, solid intelligence that demonstrates Iraq's possession of WMDs. This was basically a PowerPoint that said, trust me, bro, on it. March 6, 2003. Bush claims, quote, Iraq is part of the war on terror. Iraq is a country that has got terrorist ties. March 16th, 2003. Dick Cheney goes on Meet the Press to double down on the claim that Saddam Hussein possesses nuclear weapons. March 17th, 2003. Bush gives Saddam Hussein a 48-hour ultimatum to disarm and leave Iraq or face military conflict. And on March 19th, 2003, the U.S. invades Iraq. This is the story that the American people were told. This is the reporting that we were delivered by our media. The suggestion that Saddam Hussein and the Iraqi government were in collusion with terrorist organizations. The narrative that through these connections they were somehow manufacturing and hiding weapons of mass destruction. But the problem with these ideas is that none of them were ever true. Every last point on that timeline we just went over was a knowing lie from the Bush administration. I mean, as early as 2001, U.S. intelligence agencies had already more or less debunked the notion that Saddam Hussein or the Iraqi government had any connections to al-Qaeda or any other terrorist organizations whatsoever. I mean, 2 days after 9/11, at his own request, President Bush was briefed on the lack of evidence for this claim, with the brief denoting the scant credible evidence that Iraq had any significant collaborative ties with al-Qaeda. And as for weapons of mass destruction, not only did we find no such weapons when we did a formal check after invading, we knew they weren't there beforehand. A United Nations inspection took place in Iraq from November of 2002 until March of 2003, and 250 inspectors from 60 different countries across 400 inspections at 300 different sites led to nothing. They didn't find it. Even the smaller stuff turned out to be complete bullshit too. Remember that intelligence about them obtaining uranium from Niger? Yeah, that turned out to be information obtained in forged documents. Even the CIA later admitted they knew this information was dodgy at the time and still chose to share it anyway. But why do I belabor this point so heavily? Where does this all come into play? Why are we talking about the fucking Iraq war in the middle of a video about content slap channels? Well, through the dissemination of misinformation and the complicity of American media institutions, the United States government was able to manufacture consent for one of the deadliest excursions we have ever executed, based on information that was 100% lies. Now, were the people reporting on this at the time knowingly lying? I mean, the big reputable media orgs all claim to be doing something called neutral and objective reporting. Was that just a bold-faced lie? Well, we don't know the answer to that, and we never will, but we do know a few things about the environment that it was happening in. For one, we know that official sources overwhelmingly pushed false narratives. Most of the information that was reported on came from the US government, who was knowingly lying, so the reporting naturally reflected that. And two, there was little to no incentive to report on intelligence that challenged the government's official narrative. Our media is made up of for-profit corporations, after all, and if a narrative isn't profitable, then it doesn't get picked up, and dissenting voices are ignored and downplayed as a result. To put it simply, it doesn't matter if journalists at the time were knowingly lying or not. What matters is that a for-profit media environment that is flooded 24/7 with propaganda to manufacture consent for a war can't really be trusted to always do its journalistic due diligence with every little claim by investigating it deeper, especially when the organization they're investigating is the most powerful intelligence agency in the world. And that is the fundamental flaw of that so-called neutral and objective reporting. Because no matter how unbiased a journalist or media organization claims to be, their reporting is only ever going to be as truthful as the information that they receive. If the sources feeding them the stories are lying, whether it's government officials or corporations, then the media will inevitably publish some of those lies. And when we allow the most influential institutions in the world to dictate the narrative unquestioned, those lies are essentially laundered into legitimacy just by being repeated enough times. The more you weigh down one side of a debate with misinformation, the harder it is for your opponent to rebut you. The more you oversaturate the conversation with lies, the more the scale of public discourse starts to lean in your direction. If you can flood the marketplace of ideas with constant belligerent dogma only on one side of the debate, then you can essentially shift the focus of the conversation more towards your side. You shift the Overton window. See, you guys knew I'd bring it back around. There's a common notion that public debate is a way to arrive at the truth, that the best and truest ideas will naturally rise to the top of discourse. But in actuality, whether or not a position is true, or whether or not it has value, is almost an irrelevant factor in determining its position in public discourse. A ton of things, like the Iraq War, like racism, like fascism, have been popular among the people despite them being based solely on misinformation. The reality is that as long as powerful people and institutions are able to put their thumb on the scale of public conversation, then the truth can never be truly arrived at, because the goal itself is misguided. If you're trying to find a compromise between the truth and lies, no matter how good faith your effort is, you're gonna land somewhere short of the truth. And this is exactly how media organizations like Jubilee help fascists achieve their goals. Fascists historically work with the knowledge that their ideas are fringe ideas. They know they're unpopular because their objectives only serve to benefit an increasingly small in-group of people. Therefore, it is the goal of the fascists to constantly seek to normalize their own positions, to make it so that their ideas become socially acceptable discourse. In other words, since fascism is so unpopular, it is their main objective to pull the Overton window as far to the right as possible, to make it so that topics that previously were not up for debate suddenly are, that positions that were once considered unconscionable are now considered standard in American political discourse. This is the modern fascist project, not to capture hearts and minds by convincing everybody or by brute force or by violence, but by subversive means, lying, disrupting the customs of civil discourse, or exploiting people based off emotions like fear or anxiety or anger. I invite you to imagine for a moment that you are Michael Knowles. I know, it hurts, but imagine you are Michael Knowles, a fascist who has fascist opinions. You're not really too keen on these trans and gay folks, you want them gone. Well, if you really have your heart set on accomplishing that, it's not enough for just you to believe it, right? A lot of other people would have to believe it too. But dang it, genocide isn't popular anymore. Nobody likes it. Go figure. So what do? Well, if your goal is to change minds, then you have to make your arguments, and you have to do so in front of as many people as possible. All the time, relentlessly, until your fringe ideas are no longer fringe. Maybe you align yourself with the interests of powerful individuals making to look a quick buck. Maybe you get noticed and start being used as a political pundit. Maybe that gets you your own show on an independent news network. And maybe those connections turn into major public appearances where you can deliver your arguments not just to your core audience anymore, but to people that disagree with you, validating and uplifting your ideas that were, once upon a time, considered too harmful to broadcast. And that is where Jubilee comes in. Now, we've already stated that Jubilee is a massively popular media institution that will essentially platform any ideology regardless of its veracity or merit, so long as the debate around it provides them about an hour to an hour and a half of emotionally charged teenagers arguing with the wall. Truth does not matter to these people, just the number of 18 to 24-year-olds they can get to watch a YouTube short about the Great Replacement. Again, when media organizations prioritize profit, truth will always come second to what can generate the most attention. And do you know what group of people loves operating in spaces where truth doesn't matter? Say it with me. People who think AJR is good. Also fascists. Now you might be thinking to yourself, hey, hang on a second. Why would a fascist be so eager to debate people, right? Like, it kind of doesn't make sense. Their ideology is so inconsistent with reality and so self-contradictory that any middle schooler who just got done reading The Devil's Arithmetic could see through it. Why would they willingly open themselves up to that? Why would they not just willingly, but eagerly enter a space where the staggering abundance of holes in their ideology could be exposed? Well, again, it's not really about arriving at the truth. It's about getting the ideas out there, normalizing them, making them so ubiquitous that it's inevitable that at least some people start believing them. I mean, it's kind of like flat Earth, right? Unambiguously wrong in every way and proven wrong in every debate they do, yet they're so loud, so obnoxious, and so ubiquitous that just by sheer numbers they're able to pull the public spotlight onto an ideology that's been disproven for 3,000 fucking years and convince quite a lot of people that goddamn gravity doesn't exist in the process. That is the goal of the fascist. Not to prove their point, but simply to repeat it in front of as many people as possible. They don't care about forming an indestructible fortress of an argument. They're attention whores. They just want to be able to say Nazi shit in front of millions of people. And what organizations like Jubilee do is hand them that opportunity on a silver fucking platter. By falsely assuming that the fascist argues in good faith, they give them a chance not only to deliver their repulsive arguments, but to drag the Overton window to where they are. To say, hey, we know your ideology was essentially forced out of public life 80 years ago because of the horrors it caused, but hey, it's been long enough. Come have a seat at the table. There's a common belief that the best way to beat a fascist is to debate them. That once you show the inconsistencies in their logic or the inherent contradictions to reality present in their worldview, that's when victory is obtained. Like, that's when the fascist loses. But that's not the case. Fascists aren't just not interested in the truth. They fundamentally don't believe in it. They're anti-truth. The fascist never sets out to win the argument. They never want to prove their ideology correct. They never count on intellectually dominating their interlocutor in the marketplace of ideas. They just need to show up. They just want to say their piece. The moment the fascist signs on the dotted line to agree to appear on X show or Y broadcast, they've already accomplished their goal. They could go there and get completely dog-walked the entire time, and it wouldn't matter, because simply by being asked to appear, they've already won, before the debate even starts. Now, I hear some of you already typing comments like, how are we supposed to combat fascism if we can't argue with them? Isn't exposing their ideology an important aspect of anti-fascist action? And to that I say, no! Fascist ideas are fundamentally anti-democratic, anti-truth, and anti-freedom of expression, and therefore do not fit into what allows liberal democracies to function. You cannot reason with them, they're anti-reason. You can't debate them away, they don't believe in truth. Fascism cannot be allowed to proliferate in democracies because they are anti-democracy. No fascist has ever successfully been debated out of their positions because you can't logic someone out of a position they didn't use logic to arrive at. They literally just care about power and that's it. Allowing them to proliferate in some flowery pursuit of intellectual due diligence is actually what lets them gain power. You cannot intellectualize away the inconsistencies and cruelties of fascism using a liberal system of ethics. They will just kill you. And this is the responsibility that those who have harnessed the power of the Overton window bear. This is the obligation that media companies are faced with whether they like it or not. At the end of the day, the decision of whether or not fascist ideas are able to proliferate in society is not in the hands of the people who believe in them, but the people who broadcast them. It's not the debaters who determine the discussion, it's the people who run the debate hall it's being held in, the network it's being broadcast on, and yes, the YouTube channel that it's uploaded to. The Overton window is not something that simply arises from a given historical or cultural moment. It is intentional, something that is actively chosen. And don't get me wrong, where we put our time and attention is important, but that's really just a function of what's been presented to us. And if the overwhelming majority of online spaces are sympathetic to fucking Nazis, well then, Heil Hitler, bitch! Jubilee hides behind the idea that all ideas should be treated equally, that the intellectual process shouldn't be hindered by ideology, that the best ideas will always naturally rise to the top, an equal playing field, so to speak. But that choice to have that equal playing field is just as much of a moral judgment as the choice to keep certain ideas from the conversation is. The choice to include all topics in discussion, no matter how depraved, is just as ethically and ideologically motivated as it is to be selective about which topics you include. The prospect of being neutral or not having an ideology is itself an ideology and non-neutral. So Jubilee's commitment to letting all ideas be heard isn't a stance free of bias, it's a deliberate ideological position that prioritizes intellectual neutrality over ethics. Every political YouTuber or media company or producer or whatever at one point or another is faced with a choice. Either be completely neutral on all ideas, no matter how harmful, or be intentional about which ideas you platform and allow into the conversation. And to me, that decision is easy. One of these options enables fascists, and one doesn't. When you platform any and all perspectives, including those that promote harm, you aren't creating an equal playing field. You're granting legitimacy to dangerous ideas. So when the Overton window shifts right, it's a consequence of these debates. It's not just an accident of intellectual curiosity, it's a consequence of the ideology Jubilee pretends not to have. And that's really the strangest part about all of this, isn't it? The pretending? I mean, it feels like the ideology that motivates companies like Jubilee to make the kind of content they make, and the ethical system that permits them to be complicit in the modern rise of fascism, is something that masquerades as neither of those things. An ideology that isn't an ideology. An ethically neutral ethical system. I mean, when you say it so plainly like that, it almost sounds ridiculous. Because you can't really say, I'm choosing not to apply my own moral judgment here, and then justify that choice using your own moral judgment. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. That's still a position. You're still making a moral decision. You're just pretending not to? I mean, what is that?
My friends, I do not have much time, so heed my words. Something sinister is at play here. Something looms large over the world as we speak. Something that has captured the minds of countless individuals across the world. It has no leader, yet people die in its name. It has no allegiances or borders, yet nations crumble before it. It has no doctrine, but is professed by all of the world. This beast, it is known by many names. Austerity, the invisible hand, Randian philosophy. But the devil, my friends, has but one true title.
Hey guys, I'm gonna tell you something right now, and you have to promise not to get upset with me, okay? You gotta not be mad, all right? Because I'm gonna say something true, and it's not gonna be fun to hear, all right? Okay, here goes.
Liberalism does not inherently oppose fascism by nature. In fact, historically speaking, it has not only failed to stop the rise of several fascist movements, but in some cases even aided and abetted them as a means of consolidating power into the hands of a very few wealthy elites.
I didn't tell you that. That was not me. I don't know who that was that you heard that from, but it was somebody else, okay? In all seriousness, though, it is historically true that when push comes to shove, liberal democracies, or the governmental institutions that call themselves that at least, have been pretty piss poor at stopping fascism. In fact, a lot of the movements we typically associate with fascism were born out of liberal democracies. But Kevin, I hear you ask, liberal democracy is constituted by ideals of freedom and democracy, both of which are inherently opposed to the ideals of fascism. What gives? And while I'm glad you asked, could you not yell at me so much? While it is a fact that liberalism is an ideology that is ostensibly founded on ideals of freedom and democracy, it's also a fact that liberalism has a tendency to yield a ton of ground to fascists and the far right. So the question is, how does this happen? Well, I should first make it clear that I don't mean liberalism in the American sense, as in anything left of Fox News. I mean it in the classical sense, you know, how economists, philosophers, and every other nation on earth uses it. Now, I'm not going to go into a deep philosophical breakdown on what liberalism is. There are already videos on YouTube that do that, and I am a lazy hack, but put very simply, liberalism is defined in part by its support for and allegiance to individual liberties, particularly free speech and the willingness to hear out all ideologies equally, something I like to refer to as tolerance liberalism. Yes, I know there are other tenets of liberalism other than that. I'm just making a point for this specific topic about this specific video. Let me do the video essay. You just sit there and listen. I can hear you guys in my comments already. We're gonna get to it, okay? Jeez. Like we've seen with groups like Jubilee, liberalism often markets itself as the ideology that has no ideology, instead favoring rational discussion, verifiable facts, and good faith debate to arrive at empirical truths. Which, for all intents and purposes, is good. We like facts and reason on this channel. We're not anti-empiricists by any means. The only problem is that facts and reason can only support ideology. They can't be the ideology itself. They can determine what is true or real, but not what is important or moral. And this is something that proponents of tolerance liberalism consistently fail to recognize. And this has been seen across countless liberal democracies throughout world history, right? An aggressive and adamant insistence that liberalism as an ideology is somehow politically neutral.
The vital importance of wearing masks, of protecting yourself. This is not political.
Except it kind of is, though, Joe, right? Because you're running for goddamn president in the middle of a global fucking pandemic! And this is used as a mechanism to facilitate critical conversations about important subjects all the time, with diversity of opinion being viewed as a strength. And I'll be the first to admit, a lot of the time, this is a good thing. Diversity of opinion is largely a strength in institutions, not weakness. I am obviously not arguing against the concept of diversity here. Most of the time, people benefit from hearing perspectives and ideas that are different from their own. However, this so-called strength of liberalism, the willingness to tolerate all ideologies equally, can also be a huge weakness. In 1945, a philosopher named Karl Popper published The Open Society and Its Enemies, and in it pointed to what he saw as an internal contradiction in this whole ideology of tolerance thing. Popper posited that if a society built on tolerance fails to adequately defend itself from harmful ideologies, then that very tolerance would be what leads to the destruction of that society. In other words, if a tolerant society allows them to spread unchecked, those who believe in intolerant ideologies will exploit that goodwill and use it to dismantle society from within. Let's use Jubilee for an example. If your debate show is about finding the truth through good faith discussion, then what happens when your guest doesn't believe in truth and shows up in bad faith? Popper called this the paradox of tolerance. If society values tolerance above all else, what do you do with intolerant ideologies? Should we permit the rise of harmful ideas that, if left unchecked, will ultimately destroy tolerant society? Or do we make exceptions to our own rules in order to protect them? And if so, who decides what exceptions to make and how? It's a pretty interesting dilemma, and is one that has been debated in politics and philosophy pretty much since the end of World War II. Can't imagine why then specifically, but... And if I'm giving my personal opinion here, I think it's pretty clear that systems that have a foremost priority of tolerance can't actually survive anti-democratic attacks, as their ideology prevents them from adequately safeguarding against those who would see them destroyed. I mean, take the modern Democrats, for example. Their feckless adherence to civility politics and them clutching the rule book at all times is why we have a fascist in power right now.
What leverage do we have? They control the House, the Senate, and the presidency. It's their government.
Democracy cannot withstand the threat of fascism unless those upholding said democracy recognize the threat it poses and refuse to allow it to spread. And so, it remains the case that nearly every democracy that has taken the side of a more hands-off approach to fascism has ended up conceding significant ground to it, or in some cases even falling under its control. Turns out if you let fascists do and say whatever they want, they will exploit that opportunity to make aggressive and unconventional power grabs. Who knew? But this is the fundamental problem with tolerance liberalism that leads to the seemingly constant oscillation between democracy and authoritarianism. It treats every ideology as automatically valid and assumes all of those who represent each ideology act in good faith, ultimately paving the way for things like widespread disinformation campaigns, or the proliferation of covert Nazi propaganda, or large-scale media manipulation on behalf of a select in-group. And by the way, this is exactly what we see happening in both mainstream legacy media and independent organizations like Jubilee, a blatant willingness to spread fascist propaganda all for the sake of maintaining what they call neutrality. No matter how harmful an argument is, no matter how much deceit and manipulation is at play, liberals always assume people are arguing in good faith and will enthusiastically hold undue space for dog shit ideas. And it's funny, too, because fascists simultaneously reject the core tenets of liberalism and constantly appeal to them in order to spread their ideas. They simultaneously reject the ideology but feel entitled to all of its protection. They will actively try to limit your speech, but if they feel they've been censored, they'll make appeals to the First Amendment. They will call for the dismantling of democratic institutions but scream about election integrity the moment their guy loses. They will call the free press an enemy of the people but demand coverage from them when they want airtime. And this constant, belligerent whining that we are used to from the right isn't just hypocrisy, it's a tactic. By weaponizing liberal values against liberals, fascists create a lose-lose scenario. Either tolerate our intolerance and allow it to spread unchecked, or take action against us and betray your own principles of free expression, you hypocrite. They exploit liberal values not because they believe them or because they want to have an honest dialogue, but because it's a valuable pretext to push oppressive ideology into the mainstream. And unwitting liberals help them do it because they're ideologically committed to giving them as much airtime as they want. And the moment that fascists are allowed to do so enough times at a large enough scale is when the bad times happen. But hold on a second. If all that stuff is true, if the problem really is just the ideological neutrality thing, wouldn't that also be just as advantageous for the extreme left? Like, why is it that liberalism always ends up sliding towards fascism and never socialism, for example? If the holes in liberal ideology truly are so easily weaponized, then why haven't other extremist groups taken advantage of it? Why, instead of sliding to the right every time, do we not sometimes slide to the left? After all, there really are no examples to date of liberal democracies crumbling to the communists. If anything, it's the other way around. What's going on here? Well, my earlier definition of liberalism wasn't really all-encompassing. There is more than just tolerance as one of its core beliefs. See, I told you we would get here, okay? You need to learn to just be patient more. Fuck. Liberalism as a whole is defined mostly by the rights of the individual, and while yes, that partly includes the ideological tolerance bit, liberalism at its core represents individual rights more so as they pertain to ownership within the context of free market capitalism. Yeah, that's right, baby. It's capitalism's fault, just like everything else that I hate. Don't like it, snowflake? Then leave. Let me give you an example. In the 1920s, Germany was in a bit of a tough spot as they had just lost World War I and were dealing with the economic fallout that resulted. Honestly, shit was not working out for Germany in the 1920s, dude. Inflation was out of control, they were struggling to recoup their losses from the war, and were relying heavily on foreign loans, specifically from America, to prop up their economy through that post-war period. Then, in 1929, America, along with the rest of the world, went through something called the Great Depression. You know, that quirky little economic collapse we did, and all of that money that we were loaning Germany just, vanished, as you can probably imagine, and this was ruinous for them. Between 1929 and 1932, unemployment in Germany shot up to over 30%, and the German government, majority run by liberals at the time, did what liberals in government do best: make bad economic situations exponentially worse for the vast majority of people. In an attempt to promote austerity in the face of the Great Depression, they cut welfare and unemployment spending, increased taxes on middle-class workers, and drastically cut wages and pensions for a lot of people. Surely this will not lead to a bunch of people looking to other forms of government to escape the horrors? Well, actually, if you can believe it, that's exactly what happened. As economic desperation set in and people found themselves with increasingly less options and a sour taste in their mouths for the existing form of government, they started, as desperate people always do, to look towards alternative, more revolutionary ideologies, both on the left and the right. What we see here is a tale as old as time. Liberalism failing to provide people with their basic needs, and the people getting scared and desperate, which is exactly the breeding ground that the far-right ideology requires in order to spread. The rise of fascism is not some random occurrence that happens once every 80 years. It's a direct response to economic turmoil and social instability. Historically speaking, fascist movements have always gained traction in moments of crisis. In fact, fascism can't happen without crisis. When unemployment soars, and when wages stagnate, and when social structures collapse, people naturally seek explanations, solutions, and most of all, a sense of security. And when the status quo fails to provide that security, well, that's when the far right steps in with a simple, emotionally compelling narrative. The problem lies not with society's institutions and inherent inequalities thereof. There is an internal enemy that must be eradicated from public life. It is not the system that has failed you. Your enemy is not the owning class that are robbing you blind. No, it is those around you, your fellow citizens. They are poisoning us, making us weak. Okay, but that still doesn't answer the question of how leftists are not also able to capitalize on economic anxiety. I mean, wouldn't leftist ideology also become more popular in times of crisis? Well, it's important to note here that fascists capitalize on economic anxiety by redirecting the public's rage away from the ruling class and onto scapegoats. In some cases, it's Jewish people. In other cases, the communists. In our case, trans people and immigrants. They present a vision of national rebirth, reclaiming our once exceptional past, restoring the national order that has been taken from us, making America great again. They begin to promise swift, decisive action, often subverting institutional checks and balances to do so, all while deriding democratic institutions as bureaucratic and incapable. And you know what? When the fascist finally achieves power and calls the liberal inept, they're not even wrong, because liberal institutions care more about adhering to procedure and the facilitation of capital than directly combating authoritarianism. When they align with the far right in hopes of using them as a buffer against the left, you know, the real threat to the public, they are being inept. They are bureaucratic and incapable. The SPD, the liberal government that was in power before the Nazis, flat out refused to ally with the Communist Party to form a leftist coalition, even as the Nazis grew in power and representation, and instead continued to hopelessly cling to a crumbling status quo, all in an effort to maintain stability for capitalists. As the economy continued to deteriorate, industry leaders and financiers started to get spooked and funneled money into the Nazi movement, seeing Hitler as a strongman who could crush labor movements and guarantee profitability. And that's why leftists can't capitalize on economic anxiety as well as fascists can, or at least they can't seize power as well as fascists can, because at least under fascism, you can still do capitalism. And this cycle has played out time and time again across the annals of history, from the rise of the Nazi movement in 1920s Germany to modern fascist movements that persist even today. Liberalism, by its very nature, prioritizes the interests of capital over the well-being of the working class, making it incapable of addressing the material conditions that lead to things like fascism. And on top of that, it has no ideological protections from far-right ideology. Under liberalism, fascism fascism is allowed to spread without any institutional pushback whatsoever and is often encouraged by certain organizations that literally only care about creating controversy. And it is because of these failings that fascists will continue to exploit liberals for all their worth, slowly gaining prominence through indifferent media outlets, then obtaining control over public discourse, then rising to prominence within culture, then within government, and before you know it,
Heil Hitler, bitch!
So, what do we do? What is the answer here? After all of that, where do we go from here? Because it certainly seems like the Michael Knowles and Charlie Kirks of the world are winning right now. I mean, every day there's a new headline about another way a critical democratic institution in the country has fallen, or that a new group of people have had their civil liberties stripped away as part of an illegal subversion of due process, or that an unelected bureaucrat has gained unfettered legal access to critical government information and is gutting the administrative state as we know it. So again, what the fuck do we do? Well, this started as a video about Jubilee and how online influence and media consumption can translate into real-world harm, and in that regard, I think there's 3 things we can do. Number 1, stay informed. There is nothing that fascist movements hate more than an educated populace. Fascist movements historically have beef with educational institutions because a lack of education and knowledge is a prerequisite to being a fascist. If everyone is knowledgeable, knows history, and knows their arguments and why they're bad, they have literally no power. That's why the Nazis banned books. That's why Trump wants to close the Department of Education. If you're educated and knowledgeable, you know they are full of shit. Seek out valuable and reliable information on topics that you care about. Familiarize yourself with the arguments they use. And as much as I know it's painful, do not tune out the news. I know that it's a lot, and I know there's a new thing every day that makes you just want to stop listening, but this is precisely what they want. They want to make you feel hopeless. They want to overwhelm you with information, and they want to cause a media firestorm because it helps them get away with it. Remember, if you break one rule, people will notice. But if you break 100, the system is overloaded, and some inevitably slip through. So we can't afford to let any of it be forgotten. Number 2, stay vigilant. It's not enough to be simply knowledgeable in this environment. One must also be aware. You need not only know what a fascist is, but how they behave, what they say, their arguments, and how to spot one. And I say this not so you can debate them or show the flaws in their logic, but so you can point out the people in your community who are a danger to it. Debating and arguing with a fascist is pointless, but singling them out and making them feel shame for the beliefs they've chosen isn't. Fascist views are inherently antisocial and should be treated as such. Social ostracization is simultaneously the only way to deal with fascists and the logical conclusion of their worldview. Being a fascist should be extremely socially costly. If you encounter a fascist, make it clear that they're not welcome. Make it clear that their views make them an antisocial freak. Make them aware that it isn't because of Jews or immigrants that they have no social life and are isolated from everybody, but because of their own actions and choices. As a democracy that values inclusion and respect, we cannot allow things into our communities that would threaten that, or we risk succumbing to their influence. Treat them like they treat you. Number 3, stay involved. What is perhaps more important than being anti-fascist is being pro-human. The reason we fight for justice and the reason Jubilee gets hate and the reason I'm making this video are all the same. Because we care about our communities and want the people in them to be safe and happy. And it's important to acknowledge when something is a threat to that. Protecting your people, your space, your community requires participation in it. Form bonds with people. Get to know your neighbors. Talk to your coworkers about unionizing. Band together. Find someone who represents you and go canvass for them. Start a YouTube channel. The more we believe in community and people and the collective good, the more work it is for them to capture our hearts and minds. The more we build ourselves up, the harder it is to tear it all down. For those of you who've been with the channel for a while, you might have noticed that I was gone for about 6 months. And I'm sorry about that, by the way. But if you'll notice, my last upload was right before the election was decided, right before we all knew the fate that awaited us come January. And I will be super open and honest, I was paralyzed. I was scared. I felt like I had only those 2 months to get my whole life in order because who knows what could happen after the inauguration. I felt like I needed to change career paths and start preparing for the worst. I felt creatively uninspired. I started dozens of scripts and they all went nowhere. And honestly, I felt an intense pressure to just give up on the channel and never upload again. And so for months, I was just stuck. But eventually, it occurred to me that by doing that, I would essentially be doing what they wanted. I would be giving into the fear that they intentionally inflicted on all of us. I would be giving up simply because they told me to. And that just didn't feel right. So I started writing and eventually ended up here at the longest and most creatively intense project I have released on this channel yet. And all because Jubilee started being a little bit too comfortable with a certain type of person. Yeah, it wasn't Doge, wasn't the death camps, wasn't the collapse of the global economy. It was a goddamn online debate content just being a little too reactionary for my taste. God, I'm such a fucking tool. But that just goes to show how the seemingly smallest thing can be the jumpstart you need to start changing things. It doesn't need to be some grand, sweeping action that eliminates all of the world's problems in one fell swoop, right? You don't need a revolution. You don't need your own Luigi moment. You just need to pick something. Anything. Just something that inspires you and gets the embers of change in your heart to start burning again. It could be local community action. It could be unionizing. Hell, it could be calling up your loved ones and telling them that you love them. For me, an extremely online, arrogant, white leftist YouTuber, it was Jubilee and cringy conservatives that smile weirdly. What's it gonna be for you? Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching and for sticking around all the way to the end of the video. I know this was kind of a long one, so I really appreciate you taking the time to watch. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. What do you think about Jubilee's new show? Do you think it's good? Do you think it's bad? Do you have some take on it that you think I should see? Drop them in the comments. I read every single one and I love talking to you guys. I know I took a bit of a break there, but we are now back on track and I should be posting more regularly than I have in 2025 so far, so you can look forward to that. And if you want to support me, I do have a Patreon page where you can subscribe for some extra stuff. It's kind of a work in progress, but there is some stuff on there that you can only find on the Patreon. So if you want to support the channel, the best way to do that is through there. Anyway, yeah, I'm rambling. Thank you so much for watching. It's good to see you again, and yeah, bye.